I'm Evelyn Vance, 32, and for years, I believed my creative sanctuary was also a haven for my family. I was wrong. I never expected to walk into my own studio, the place where my grandfather's spirit still lingered in the scent of sawdust and linseed oil, and find it transformed into a chaotic makeshift flea market. I'd just returned from a successful art exhibition in Portland, my head buzzing with new ideas and the satisfaction of a job well done. But that serene feeling lasted only until I saw the banner draped haphazardly across the entrance to Grandpa Leo's old woodworking shop. Vance Family Fundraiser, Mark's Bright Future. My brother Mark, 35, stood by the entrance, charmingly haggling over a dusty antique lamp that clearly belonged to my grandfather. His usual worn-out t-shirt was replaced with a crisp, if slightly rumpled, button-down, a forced air of professionalism that always preceded his latest doomed venture. My father, Robert, 58, was in the main workshop, directing a small army of distant cousins and acquaintances, his voice a little too loud, his gestures a little too dramatic, as he pointed to tables, laden with what looked like decades of accumulated family junk. They were selling off our family's history, piece by piece, to fund Mark's latest pipe dream, a gourmet dog treat delivery service. That sounded suspiciously like every other half-baked idea he'd ever had. The air usually filled with the comforting smell of freshly cut wood, and my oil paints was thick with the scent of stale coffee, cheap perfume, and desperation. The gentle hum of my air purifier, which diligently filtered out dust and fumes from my digital art station, was drowned out by the cacophony of chatter, clanging objects, and Mark's booming laugh. If you're watching this from a place where your family respects your boundaries and your space, count yourself lucky. Drop a comment about your own experiences, good or bad, and subscribe to follow what happened after I made the decision that changed everything. My journey into the world of art and design was less a path and more a calling. While other kids were outside playing, I was in Grandpa Leo's workshop, often covered in sawdust, watching him transform rough lumber into works of art. He was a master carpenter, his hands calloused but incredibly gentle. He taught me the beauty of grain, the patience of carving, the quiet satisfaction of creating something lasting. He'd let me draw on his discarded wood scraps, patiently explaining perspective and composition, even when my stick figures looked like aliens. My father, Robert, a successful retired architect, never quite understood my passion. "Art doesn't pay the bills, Evelyn," he'd often say, his tone laced with a practical dismissal that felt like a sting. "Why don't you try something more stable, like architecture, like Mark?" Mark, 3 years older than me, was the golden child. He had a natural charm, a knack for making people believe in his grand schemes, no matter how outlandish. He'd breeze through life, expecting things to be handed to him, while I toiled away, honing my skills. After high school, I enrolled in the Oregon College of Art and Craft, working 2 part-time jobs to cover tuition and supplies. I spent countless nights hunched over my drawing tablet, perfecting my digital painting techniques, experimenting with textures and developing my unique style inspired by the intricate patterns of nature. When others were out at parties, I was deep into a project driven by a quiet ambition that my grandfather always encouraged. "A true artist builds their own canvas, Evelyn," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. "And sometimes that canvas is digital and sometimes it's wood, but it's always from the heart." By 25, I was making a name for myself as a freelance graphic artist, specializing in ecological illustrations and sustainable branding. My clients ranged from small organic farms in the Willamette Valley to international conservation organizations. I was living in a modest studio apartment in downtown Portland, my walls covered with my work, my desk perpetually cluttered with sketchbooks and a high-end drawing tablet. Mark, meanwhile, was on his 4th entrepreneurial venture. There was the organic kombucha brewery that ended with a mold infestation, the luxury pet grooming salon that lasted 3 months, and the virtual reality escape room that never got past the conceptual stage. Each failure drained my father's retirement savings, which he poured into his eldest son's dreams without hesitation, convinced that his big break was just around the corner. I remember, once when I was 16, I won a statewide art competition. It was a significant achievement for me, the first real public recognition of my talent outside of Grandpa Leo's quiet praise. I ran home bursting with excitement to show my father the certificate and the small cash prize. He glanced at it, nodded perfunctorily, and then immediately pivoted to Mark's latest high school football game. "That's nice, Evelyn," he'd said, barely looking up from his newspaper. "But did you hear about Mark's touchdown? He practically won the game for the Cougars." That's what real dedication looks like. It was a small moment, easily forgotten by him. But it cemented a pattern I would see repeat endlessly. My achievements were secondary, always overshadowed by Mark's potential or even his mediocrity. Grandpa Leo passed away 2 years ago, quietly. In his sleep, his will was simple and clear. The old woodworking shop, nestled on a sprawling 5-acre property just outside Portland, was left solely to me. To Eleanor, my artist, who understands the true value of craftsmanship and bringing new life to old spaces. His handwritten note accompanying the will read. My father was furious. He must have been confused. That workshop was meant for the family, he'd insisted, his face contorted with a mixture of grief and indignation. "It's a valuable piece of property, Evelyn. You should sell it and split the money with Mark. He needs it for his next project." He even hinted at contesting the will, suggesting Grandpa Leo had become senile in his final years. But I couldn't. The workshop wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary of memories. It was the scent of pine, the sound of Grandpa's planer, the feel of smooth, sanded wood beneath my fingers. It was every Sunday afternoon spent learning to carve every proud glance he'd given me when I showed him a new drawing. I moved in immediately, transforming part of the workshop into my digital art studio, preserving his tools and his workbench as a tribute. I even began incorporating his woodworking techniques into my digital art, blending the old with the new. I replanted his herb garden following his meticulous notes, bringing back the aromatic lavender and rosemary he'd cultivated for decades. Despite the obvious tension over the inheritance, I tried to maintain a relationship with my father and brother. I invited them for Sunday lunches in the workshop, which they attended with an air of being inconvenienced guests rather than welcomed family. My father would often dismiss my artistic accomplishments, instead questioning my financial stability and encouraging me to think about a real career. I offered to help Mark with business plans, marketing strategies for his fledgling, ideas, practical support rather than cash. He always declined, citing my lack of business acumen. I even offered to help my father with the rising property taxes on the workshop, which he accepted, but always with a sigh, as if it were a burden I had placed on him rather than a choice I was making to ease his financial worries. My latest exhibition in Portland was a critical milestone. It was my first solo show, showcasing a series of large-format digital prints that blended botanical art with abstract geometric patterns. Inspired by Grandpa Leo's intricate wood joinery, the opening night was a whirlwind of positive reviews, eager collectors, and genuine appreciation for my work. The gallery owner wanted to host a reception for me, but I was exhausted. All I wanted was to return to my studio, to the familiar, quiet, and bask in the glow of my success in my own way. I booked an early flight, not telling anyone I was returning a day ahead of schedule, which would be my private moment of triumph. During the drive home, I scrolled through photos of my studio on my phone. The sunlight would be streaming through the tall windows now, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, highlighting the aged wood of Grandpa's workbench. I thought about the rare bottle of artisanal cider I'd been saving for a special occasion. This certainly qualified. The Uber turned onto the long, winding gravel driveway leading to the workshop, and I felt that familiar warmth of coming home after a long journey. That feeling lasted exactly 3 seconds. The sight that greeted me was an affront to every fiber of my being. Cars were everywhere, parked haphazardly on the lawn, blocking the entrance to the workshop. The usually serene property, surrounded by whispering pines, now throbbed with its dull bass of generic pop music. My driver had to stop at the gate, half a mile down the drive. "Looks like quite the shindig," he commented as he helped me with my luggage, his tone too cheerful for the growing dread in my stomach. I stood on the gravel path, staring at my sanctuary, trying to comprehend the chaos before me. Lights blazed from every window of the workshop. Shadows of people moved inside, silhouetted against my carefully organized shelves of art supplies and my grandfather's tools. Laughter and conversations spilled out onto my meticulously maintained grounds where strangers now stood in clusters, plastic cups in hand, their casual disregard for my space a physical punch to my gut. What was happening? Had my workshop been taken over? I took a deep breath, the scent of wood smoke strangely absent, replaced by something artificial and cloying. I wheeled my suitcase up the path to my own door, a sense of profound violation growing with each step. The walk from the gate to the workshop felt surreal. My small herb garden, which I had spent countless hours tending, was now a trampled mess. Potted plants that I had carefully arranged to welcome visitors were scattered, some knocked over, their soil spilling onto the gravel. Cigarette butts dotted the ground like tiny malicious flags. Someone had moved Grandpa's antique wooden bench, usually tucked under the shade of the old oak, to form a makeshift seating area in the sun, and rings from sweating beer bottles stained its aged surface. A group of rowdy teenagers I'd never seen before stood near the ancient grinding stone, one attempting to balance a beer can on its rusted surface. I wanted to tell him that was a piece of history, not a coaster, but I was too stunned to speak. Children chased each other around the property, one dangerously close to knocking over the delicate stone lantern that Grandpa Leo had painstakingly crafted from a single boulder decades ago. No one stopped me or questioned my presence as I approached. My own home. Why would they? I was just another face in a sea of strangers. The large sliding barn door, which I usually kept securely locked, was propped open with a broken broom handle. I stepped inside, and the sensory assault was immediate. The smell hit me first, a mixture of stale beer, cheap pizza, and an overwhelming scent of mothballs and dust, as if someone had ransacked an old attic. The sound was deafening, dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, music blaring from a portable speaker, children shrieking as they ran up and down the narrow stairs leading to the loft storage. The temperature was stifling. So many bodies in a space meant for far fewer people. My foyer, normally a calm space with a simple wrought-iron coat rack and a mirror, was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and what looked like a collection of dusty ceramics. A hastily drawn banner hung across the archway leading to the main workshop area. Vance Family Fundraiser, Mark's Future. Someone had set up a folding table with a rusty cash box and a sign-up sheet. I moved through my home in a daze, recognizing distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, mingled with faces completely unknown to me. My great-aunt Carol, who I thought lived in Arizona, was sitting on a stack of old quilts, gossiping loudly. Cousins I vaguely remembered from childhood summers were clustered around my large central workbench, which had been covered with a plastic sheet and was now laden with baked goods and questionable-looking casseroles. I spotted my father in the main workshop area, wearing a crisp, freshly ironed shirt, directing to women who appeared to be managing the sales. He was pointing to my carefully organized lumber racks, telling them where to find more inventory. Robert was 58 but looked younger, his hair impeccably styled. When he turned and saw me, there was no joy in his expression, no surprise. Instead, he looked annoyed, his smile faltering. "Evelyn, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Portland until tomorrow." "Not a welcome home, or we missed you." Just irritation at my unexpected appearance at my own workshop. "I live here, Dad," I said, still struggling to process the scene. "What is all this?" It's the family fundraiser, he said as if it were obvious. For Mark's new venture, we've been planning it for weeks. Planning what? In my workshop. Without telling me? He waved dismissively. We knew you were busy with your art. Besides, you're always saying the workshop is too big for just you, that it needs to be activated with family events. That wasn't true. I'd never said anything remotely like that. Fact, I'd been clear about my boundaries regarding the workshop, especially after Mark had once tried to host a rock band practice here while I was working. Before I could respond, my brother appeared, carrying a box of what looked like empty picture frames. At 35, Mark still had the same boyish charm that had gotten him out of trouble throughout childhood. He wore a blue polo shirt with Mark's gourmet dog treats embroidered on the pocket. "Oh, you're back early," he said casually. "Surprise!" The afterthought lacked any genuine enthusiasm. "How did you even get in?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Dad had the spare key you gave him for emergencies." Mark replied with a shrug. "Don't worry, everything's under control. We're wrapping up soon, and Aunt Carol said she'd help us clean up tomorrow morning." I looked around at my workshop, transformed without my knowledge or consent into a venue for people who were largely strangers to me. I noticed fresh scratches on Grandpa's antique workbench where someone had carelessly dragged a heavy box. Someone had rearranged my digital art station to accommodate more seating. Pushing my large display monitor perilously close to the edge of the table, a group of older men, seemingly Mark's investors, approached me with curious expressions. "You look familiar. Are you from the Oregon side of the Vances or the California side?" "I'm Evelyn Vance. This is my workshop," I said. Flatly, their eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're Leo's granddaughter, the one who got the workshop." The way he said "got the workshop" made it sound like I'd won a lottery prize, rather than inherited my grandfather's cherished space that I'd spent countless hours in throughout my life. "Yes, I own this workshop," I clarified. "Well, it's nice of you to host everyone. It's a beautiful place. Should have been divided among the family, though, if you ask me." A lot of people were surprised by Leo's decision. He wandered off before I could respond, leaving me seething. I moved through the crowd, hearing snippets of similar conversations. Never see her at family functions anyway. Spends all her time with her art. What would she do with all this space? I spotted old family photos displayed that had been taken from my storage boxes in the loft. Cousins were sifting through. Grandpa Leo's collection of woodworking journals. Someone had moved my high-end drawing tablet from my office to make space for a dessert table. My private creative space had been completely violated. In the main workshop area, I discovered a stack of custom flyers with Mark's Gourmet Dog Treats Grand Launch fundraiser printed on them, along with a date 3 weeks ago. This wasn't a spontaneous gathering. It had been planned well in advance, without me. My head was spinning. I needed air. I stepped out onto the small back deck, only to find it occupied by teenagers I didn't recognize, scrolling on their phones and complaining about being dragged to a lame family thing. I walked back through the workshop, past my father, who was now posing for photos with people introduced as second cousins from Arizona. Past Mark, who was mingling with potential investors, soaking up attention. Past great uncle, someone, and first cousin once removed, whoever. No one noticed as I picked up my suitcase, still sitting by the entrance where I'd left it. No one called after me as I walked out the large barn door. I made it halfway down the gravel driveway before tears blurred my vision. I pulled out my phone and booked a room at a boutique hotel in Seattle. I couldn't stay and make a scene. I couldn't pretend this was okay. I needed space to think. As the Uber pulled away, I looked back at Grandpa Leo's workshop. My workshop glowing with light and life, filled with people who didn't know me, didn't respect me, and apparently didn't miss me when I wasn't included in family events. The betrayal cut deep, but it was the disrespect to my grandfather's wishes and my personal space that hurt most of all. I checked into the hotel in a daze, dropped my suitcase by the generic desk, and sat on the edge of the bed. The quiet of the room was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just left. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen, wondering who to call, what to do next, and how I'd ever look at my workshop the same way again. The hotel room felt sterile and impersonal, but at least it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour, my mind replaying the events of the evening like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. This wasn't the first time my father and brother had dismissed my feelings, but it was certainly the most flagrant dot as the initial shock wore off. Memories surfaced from throughout my life, a pattern I'd normalized but now saw clearly. My 10th birthday party, where my father invited Mark's entire baseball team but forgot to order a cake I wasn't allergic to. "Oh, Evelyn, don't make a fuss. The other children are enjoying themselves." My college graduation, where they arrived late and left early for Mark's charity basketball game. "It's the playoffs, Evelyn. Did you just walk across the stage? We'll see the photos." The biggest one when I received a prestigious art scholarship to study in Florence. And my father responded by asking if I'd considered something more practical, like joining his architecture firm. Meanwhile, Mark's mediocre grades were celebrated, his abandoned hobbies funded, his irresponsibility framed as finding himself. I called my best friend Chloe at midnight, not caring about the late hour. Chloe, a sharp-witted attorney, had witnessed my family dynamics for over 20 years and never minced words about them. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I explained the situation. "In your workshop without even telling you? Hell no, Evelyn. That's beyond disrespectful." "Am I overreacting?" I asked, suddenly doubting myself as I'd been conditioned to do overreacting. If anything, you're underreacting. They invaded your personal space, used your property without permission, and didn't even invite you to a family event in your own home. That's not normal, Evelyn. That's not okay. Chloe's validation helped solidify what I already knew. This wasn't about a party. This was about a fundamental lack of respect that had characterized my relationship with my father and brother. For decades, I'd set boundaries. I consistently ignored them. I'd offered olive branches. I took them for granted. I'd made excuses for their behavior that they never had to make for themselves. I barely slept that night, my mind running through options. Confront them. They'd minimize it. Request an apology. They'd give a hollow one to appease me. Until, next time, try to explain my feelings. They'd make me feel oversensitive. Morning came, and with it, resolve. I returned to my workshop at 9 a.m., expecting most guests would be gone. I was right about the guests, but wrong about the state of my home. The scene was worse than I imagined. Empty bottles and paper plates littered every surface. Food had been ground into Grandpa's antique throw rugs. Someone had been sick in the old utility sink. Rental chairs were stacked haphazardly in the main workshop. My herb garden looked like a tornado had hit it. My father was in the kitchen area, drinking coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered. "There you are. Where did you disappear to last night?" So dramatic, Evelyn. No apology, no acknowledgement of the violation. It's just criticism of my reaction. "I stayed at a hotel. My studio was apparently being used as a storage unit," I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. "Oh, that was Mark's idea. We needed the space. You know how these things go. Aunt Carol and I are just finishing up, and the junk haulers will be here at noon." "That's not the point, Dad. You used my workshop without asking me. You didn't even tell me about a fundraiser, let alone invite me to it." He sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "You're always working anyway. Would you even have come? Besides, you're so particular about everything. If we'd asked, you would have had a million conditions." Yes, I would have had conditions about the use of my personal property. That's normal. Mark emerged from the loft, hair disheveled, wearing yesterday's clothes. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee. "Great fundraiser, right?" Everyone loved the workshop. "Mark, why didn't you tell me about this fundraiser?" I asked directly. He shrugged. We needed a big place, and you have all this space? Seemed obvious. What's the big deal? We're family. The big deal is that this is my workshop, not a public venue you can just decide to use without my permission. Technically, it's the family workshop, my father interjected, his voice firm with the authority he always assumed. Your grandfather would have wanted everyone to enjoy it. He was a generous man. That was the match that lit the fuse. Don't you dare tell me what my grandfather would have wanted. He specifically left this workshop to me because he knew I would respect and care for it, not turn it into a public spectacle for Mark's latest failed business venture. I walked away from them, needing to assess the damage throughout the workshop. What I found sent me from angry to livid. In the main workshop, Grandpa Leo's antique workbench, the one he'd shown me as an example of craftsmanship and integrity, had a deep scratch across its surface and what looked like a burn mark from a hot pan. This was despite my clear rule of keeping food and drinks away from the wood. The workbench wasn't just furniture. It was where he'd taught me to carve, where he'd polished countless pieces, where he'd penned his final notes. I continued to my digital art studio and found the door ajar, a room I always kept locked. Someone had picked or forced the lock. Inside, drawers were open. My carefully organized art files had been moved. My high-end display tablet had been relocated. The framed first illustration I'd ever sold in college had been taken off the wall. The glass cracked. Upstairs in the loft, storage was no better. My personal art collection, usually stored carefully, had been rummaged through. Dresser drawers in the small sleeping area were not fully closed. Someone had been in my personal space, touched my things. I returned downstairs to find my father and brother in casual conversation about someone named Cousin Patty, who'd apparently been the hit of the fundraiser with her handmade potholders. My studio was broken into, I said flatly. My personal art was entered. Grandpa's workbench is damaged. Oh, some kids were playing around, Mark said dismissively. And that workbench thing is probably just a water ring. Buff out. It's a burn mark and a deep scratch, I corrected him. It's a 100-year-old workbench. It's always so dramatic about things, Evelyn, my father sighed, his tone implying I was being ridiculous. It's just stuff. Just stuff? Mark needs this, Evelyn. You have your career. This workshop is just a hobby for you, isn't it? It can serve a greater purpose for the family. The words echoed in my head. To them, this workshop and everything in it was just stuff they felt entitled to use, damage, and disregard. Because technically, we shared DNA. But to me, it was more than stuff. It was my sanctuary, my history, my private space that had been violated by the very people who should respect it most. I pulled up my phone and called my friend Chloe again. Can you come over? I need moral support. While waiting for Chloe, I walked through each room taking photos of the damage. When she arrived, she gasped at the state of the workshop. This is worse than I imagined, she said, hugging me. What are you going to do? I looked around at the home and studio I'd loved, now feeling tainted by disrespect. I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep pretending this is normal. After Chloe left, I made another call to David Miller, a real estate agent who specialized in unique properties and had approached me several times about the workshop's potential. The property was in a prime location, nestled in the scenic Oregon countryside, and developers had been eyeing it since my grandfather's passing. David, it's Evelyn Vance. Remember that offer you mentioned last month? Is it still on the table? My father and brother, who were in the kitchen discussing which relatives still needed rides to the bus station, fell silent when they heard my side of the conversation. For the first time since I'd arrived home, I had their full attention. David arrived at my workshop within the hour, his normally slick real estate agent demeanor softening when he saw the state of the property. This is not how I remember the workshop looking during our previous discussions, he said tactfully, eyeing a spilled drink stain on one of Grandpa's old drafting tables. Family gathering? I said tersely. Let's talk in the back garden. We sat at the rustic picnic table on my patio, the only area relatively unscathed from the fundraiser chaos. David opened his portfolio and got straight to business, which I appreciated. The cash buyer I mentioned before is still very interested. Catherine Holloway, art collector, gallery owner, just relocated from New York. She's been looking for a unique property in this area, specifically one with historical artistic value. What's her timeline? I asked. She's motivated. Currently renting a large home and wants to settle quickly. She can close as fast as your side can handle the paperwork, and she understands it's as ease. I won't be making repairs or improvements. David nodded. At this price point, and in this market, she's buying for the location, the artistic heritage, and the potential. She plans to use it as a private gallery and artist retreat anyway. I took a deep breath, a strange calm settling over me. What's her offer? 1.8 million cash, slightly below market value for the expedited timeline, but no inspection. Contingencies, no financing delays. I nodded slowly. I want to move forward. David tried to contain his surprise and excitement. Are you sure? This is a significant decision. The workshop has been in your family for generations. I'm aware of its history. That's precisely why I'm making this decision. I looked toward the workshop window where I could see my father and brother in animated conversation, likely speculating about my meeting with David. How quickly can we draw up the paperwork? I can have preliminary documents ready this afternoon. It's a full contract by end of day. If the buyer agrees to expedite her side, we could potentially close within days rather than weeks. Perfect. And I'll need the services of a good real estate attorney to ensure everything is properly handled. David made a call, and by 2 p.m., my lawyer, Sarah Chen, arrived. I'd worked with her before on setting up my intellectual property rights. She was thorough and discreet, exactly what I needed. While David prepared the initial paperwork in my damaged studio, Sarah and I spoke privately in the garden. Are you certain about this, Evelyn? A hasty sale often benefits the buyer more than the seller. Understand that, Sarah. But my circumstances have changed and I need to move quickly. The price is fair enough, considering the convenience of a cash deal and quick closing. She studied my face. This isn't like you. You're usually methodical about financial decisions. Sometimes clarity comes suddenly, I replied. I've realized this workshop has become more burden than blessing. By late afternoon, I had signed preliminary documents and authorized David to present the offer to Catherine Holloway. My father and brother had been suspiciously quiet, observing from a distance, but not interfering. That changed when David left. What was that about? My father demanded, entering the garden where I sat reviewing paperwork with Sarah. Business, I replied simply. What kind of business requires a real estate agent at our family workshop? His emphasis on our didn't escape me. I introduced Sarah as my attorney, which immediately put my father on alert. I'm selling the workshop, I said calmly. The buyer is prepared to close quickly. I'll need you both to remove your belongings by tomorrow evening. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the explosion. You can't be serious, my father finally spluttered. This is impulsive and ridiculous, even for you. Evelyn, have you lost your mind? Mark stepped forward. Come on, Evelyn, you're overreacting about the fundraiser. We said we're sorry. Neither of you has actually apologized, I pointed out. But this isn't about apologies anymore. This is about recognizing that some boundaries, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. So you're punishing us by selling our family workshop. My father's voice rose with indignation, his architectural precision giving way to raw anger. This is an ancestral property. Your grandfather would be spinning in his grave. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making a decision about my property that makes sense for my life moving forward. We won't let you do this, Mark threatened. Grandpa would never have wanted you to sell. He'd have wanted the family to benefit from it. Grandpa trusted me to make my own decisions. That's why he left the workshop to me, not to the family collectively. He saw my dedication, my actual work, not just my brother's endless potential. My father switched tactics, his voice softening, a condescending tone creeping in. Evelyn, honey, you're upset. I understand what we did was thoughtless, but selling your grandfather's workshop is a decision you'll regret forever. Let's all take some time to cool down. You're being emotional. It was the same pattern I'd seen my entire life. Minimize, deflect. Then pretend to compromise when those tactics failed, always with an underlying suggestion that my feelings were irrational. Not this time. The decision is made, Dad. I've signed the preliminary documents. Ms. Holloway has already verbally accepted the offer and is sending the signed contract back tonight. Sarah, bless her, chose that moment to interject. Mr. Vance, the transaction is already in process. Your daughter has the legal right to sell her property. I suggest you respect her decision and focus on your arrangements for relocation. My father turned to me, tears welling in his eyes, a desperate plea in his voice that was rarely directed at me. Where are we supposed to go on such short notice? You know I'm retired. This is all I have left. The manipulation was so transparent. It almost made me laugh. The same place you were living before you decided to move Mark in here without asking. Your condo. The one I've been paying the HOA fees for. Mark stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. I could contest Grandpa's will, say he was manipulated or not of sound mind. You manipulated him, Evelyn. Sarah answered before I could. The deadline for contesting the will passed 18 months ago, Mr. Vance, and I personally conducted the capacity assessment before your grandfather signed his will. It would be a frivolous claim, and I assure you, my client is prepared to countersue for any legal fees incurred. I spent the rest of the evening in methodical organization, packing the items that truly mattered to me. My grandfather's collection of rare woodworking tools, family photos from happier times. The small wooden box of letters he'd written me throughout college, carefully wrapped his favorite carving knife, and the compass he'd used to lay out his designs. His workbench would have to stay too damaged now to transport safely without professional help, and too painful to look at daily. Perhaps Catherine Holloway would restore it, or perhaps it would be replaced by something modern. Either way, I was learning that the memories attached to objects lived on, even when the objects themselves changed hands. My father made several more attempts to change my mind, alternating between guilt, anger, and sudden promises to do better in the future. Mark fluctuated between threats and bargaining. I remained resolute, feeling a strange sense of peace despite the chaos around me. By midnight, my essential belongings were packed into my car. I'd booked an extended stay hotel until I could find a new place. As I prepared to leave for the night, I took one last walk through the workshop, not as a goodbye, but as a release. Each room held memories, but I realized the most important ones would travel with me. My father stood in the foyer as I headed for the door, his final attempt at manipulation ready. If you do this, Evelyn, you're tearing apart this family. This is my legacy you're destroying. I turned to him with a sad smile. Dad, you can't tear apart something that was never truly together. And my legacy is what I build, not what you try to control. I slept more soundly in the hotel that night than I had in months. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the workshop by 8 a.m. to find Catherine Holloway and her assistant already waiting outside. David made the introductions. Catherine was younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, with a quiet confidence and thoughtful manner. She'd made her fortune in sustainable art installations and was refreshingly straightforward. I appreciate the expedited process, Ms. Vance. I understand this is a significant property with family history. Please call me Evelyn, I said. And yes, it has history, but it's ready for a new chapter. We walked through the workshop together. I made no attempt to hide the damage from the fundraiser, and to her credit, Catherine didn't flinch or try to renegotiate based on the condition. "The bones are magnificent," she commented, examining the original timber beams in the main workshop. "You can't build this kind of character anymore." In my grandfather's old corner, she paused at the damaged workbench. "This is a shame, American craftsman, period. Yes, circa 1920. My grandfather cherished it," said. "I know a restoration expert who specializes in period furniture. If you're not taking it with you, I'd like to have it properly repaired." That small gesture of respect for the workshop's history meant more than she could know. The walkthrough complete, we gathered in my former digital art studio, where Sarah had set up the closing documents. The process was surprisingly simple for such a significant transaction. Signatures, initials, more signatures. David beamed throughout, mentally calculating his commission. As we were reviewing the final documents, the main barn door burst open. My brother Mark stormed in, followed by my father. "Stop. This is a mistake," Mark shouted, his face flushed with anger, or perhaps last night's residual alcohol. Catherine and her assistant exchanged alarmed glances. Sarah stepped forward, ever professional. "Mr. Vance, this is a private real estate closing. If you're not a party to the transaction, I must ask you to leave." My father pushed past Sarah, addressing Catherine directly. "This workshop has been in our family for generations. My daughter is making an emotional decision she'll regret. Surely, as a businesswoman, you understand the importance of careful consideration." "She's being irrational." Catherine looked uncomfortable, but stood her ground. "Mr. Vance, I respect family bonds deeply, but I've entered into a legal contract with Evelyn, who I understand is the sole owner of this property." Mark moved closer, desperation in his eyes. "Evelyn, please, we can work this out." "Well, respect your space. No more surprise fundraisers. You can have whatever rules you want." For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. These were the promises I'd wanted to hear yesterday, last week, last year. But I knew they were empty, offered only when something was being taken away, not out of genuine respect for my boundaries. "It's too late, Mark. The decision is made." My father played his final card. "If you do this, Evelyn, you're destroying your grandfather's legacy. If you're spitting on all the hard work I've put into this family, supporting you." I set down my pen and turned to face him fully. "Grandpa's legacy isn't this workshop, Dad. It's the values he lived by and taught me. Integrity, respect, self-reliance, and cherishing what you build yourself. He left me this workshop because he trusted my judgment, not yours or Mark's. And I'm using that judgment now, by throwing away your family," he countered, tears streaming down his face, a performance I'd seen countless times. "You're abandoning us?" "No, by recognizing that family is supposed to support and respect each other, not exploit and dismiss each other. You've had countless opportunities to treat me as a valued family member. Instead, you've treated me as an inconvenience. At best, a resource to use, at worst, and always beneath Mark." Mark stepped forward, his tone threatening. "If you do this, don't expect us to be there when you realize what a mistake you've made. You'll be all alone." I looked at my brother, the boy I'd helped with homework, the teenager whose bad decisions I'd covered for, the adult whose business ventures I'd silently funded. I felt a profound sadness, but also a strange relief. "That's a risk I'm willing to take." Sarah, ever practical, interrupted the family drama. "If we could continue with the closing, Ms. Holloway has a tight schedule." My father made one last emotional appeal, promising that things would be different, that he understood now how I felt, that we could start fresh. But his words rang hollow against the backdrop of decades of similar promises, all broken. I signed. The final documents, Catherine Holloway handed over a cashier's check for the down payment, with the remainder to be wired upon recording of the deed. We shook hands, and just like that, the workshop that had been in my family for 3 generations belonged to someone else. The moment was anticlimactic, no thunderclap, no dramatic music. Just the rustle of papers being gathered. And the quiet click of briefcases closing. Catherine approached me after the formalities were complete. I want you to know I'll honor the history of this home. It won't be torn down or fundamentally changed. Thank you. That means a lot. I handed her a set of keys, the same keys my grandfather had given me 2 years earlier. There's a hidden compartment in the main workshop behind the third tool chest from the left. My grandfather kept historical documents about the workshop there. You might find them interesting. She accepted the keys with a respectful nod. You're welcome to visit if you ever want to. That's kind, but I don't think I will. Some chapters need to stay closed. My father and brother watched in stunned silence as I gathered my belongings. There were no goodbye hugs, no wishes for good luck in my new life, just the heavy weight of choices made and consequences accepted. As I walked down the gravel path for the last time, I felt lighter with each step. The garden that had once brought me joy now reminded me only of disrespect. The walls that had witnessed my grandfather's lessons now echoed with the sounds of a fundraiser I hadn't sanctioned. I placed the last box in my car and looked back one final time. My father stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his posture rigid with a mix of defiance and defeat. My brother was nowhere to be seen. I raised my hand in a small wave, then got in my car and drove away from the workshop to check for $1.8 million in my purse and an uncertain but unencumbered future ahead of me. The first week after selling the workshop passed in a blur of practical matters. I moved from the extended stay hotel to a furnished studio apartment in downtown Portland with a 6-month lease, giving myself time to decide where I wanted to settle permanently. I opened a new investment account for the majority of the proceeds, set aside funds for taxes, and tried to adjust to my new reality. The silence from my family was both expected and jarring. No calls, no texts, not even angry voicemails. It was as if I'd ceased to exist in their world the moment I signed those closing documents. Part of me was relieved to avoid the drama, but another part ached for the family I wished I had. One that would have acknowledged the pain they caused and genuinely sought reconciliation. That silence broke on day 10 when my social media accounts suddenly flooded with messages from extended family members, cousins I barely knew, great aunts I hadn't seen in years, all expressing their shock and disappointment in my selfish decision to rob the family of its heritage. The stories they'd been told were predictably one-sided. According to the family grapevine, I'd had a tantrum over a harmless family fundraiser and impulsively sold our communal heritage out of spite. No mention of the uninvited use of my home, the damage to irreplaceable items, or the years of disrespect that had led to my breaking point. I didn't bother responding to most messages, but I did answer my cousin Emily, who had always been kind. To me, her message was more measured than the others, asking genuinely if I was okay. I'm doing fine, I wrote back. There's more to the story than you've probably heard, but I'm at peace with my decision. I hope you and your family are well. Her response surprised me. I figured there was more to it. Your dad and Mark have always had a different version of reality. For what it's worth, I think Grandpa Leo would understand. He never let anyone walk over him either. That small validation from someone who had known my grandfather meant more than she could realize. At work, I threw myself into new digital art projects, exploring themes of growth and resilience. My clients noticed my renewed focus and energy. Chloe observed during our weekly lunch that I seemed lighter somehow, despite everything. I feel lighter, I admitted. I didn't realize how much emotional weight that workshop carried, not just the good memories of Grandpa, but the constant struggle with Dad and Mark. Now, when I come home, it's just my space. No history, no expectations, no disappointment. Have you heard from them at all? Chloe asked. Not directly. I've heard through the family rumor mill that they had to move back to Dad's condo. Apparently, Mark had started moving things into the workshop, assuming they could stay indefinitely, and Dad was complicit. Chloe shook her head. The audacity. What did they think would happen? They thought I'd continue tolerating whatever they dished out, like I always have. 2 weeks after the sale, I received an email from Catherine Holloway with photos of the restoration work beginning on Grandpa Leo's workbench. The craftsman believes he can repair the damage completely, he wrote. When it's finished, would you like to have it? Seems to hold special meaning for you. Her unexpected kindness brought tears to my eyes. Declined the offer. The workbench belonged with the workshop, but her recognition of its significance was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. That same evening, I was cooking dinner in my new apartment when my doorbell rang. Wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw my father standing. In the hallway, his appearance disheveled in a way I'd never seen before. His normally impeccable posture was slumped, his clothes wrinkled. He'd been crying. My first instinct was not to answer, to protect the peace I'd been cultivating. But something, perhaps my grandfather's voice in my head, reminding me about integrity, made me open the door. "Dad," I said simply, neither inviting him in nor sending him away. "Evelyn," his voice cracked on my name. "Can I please come in, just to talk?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered cautiously, as if expecting to be ejected at any moment. My apartment was modest compared to the workshop, a simple one-bedroom with standard fixtures and builder grade. Finishes, nothing special, but mine. Completely mine. "It's nice," he offered, looking around. "Cozy. What do you want, Dad?" I asked, too tired for small talk. He sank onto my couch, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "We've been evicted from my condo. The HOA found out Mark was living there when the rules specifically prohibited additional occupants. He'd turned the guest room into a mini warehouse for his dog treat ingredients. Of course he hadn't come to reconcile, but to seek financial help, most likely. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Where are you staying now?" "A motel, temporarily. It's not ideal. Mark is looking for work, but you know how that goes." I didn't. My brother's employment history was a series of enthusiastic starts and abrupt departures. "What about your savings?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Used for the fundraiser," he admitted, not meeting my eyes. "And some for Mark's latest business idea, artisanal kombucha delivery service." The location fell through. It was supposed to be his big break, Evelyn. You selling the workshop? It just threw everything off. The admission hung in the air between us. My father had spent his retirement savings on a fundraiser for my brother's doomed venture, and he was blaming me. "How much do you need?" I asked, cutting to the chase. He looked up, hope flashing across his face. "It's just enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a new place. 3,000, maybe 4. I'll pay you back, of course. I have plenty of money now." The familiar pattern presented itself. His crisis, my resources. Promises of repayment that would never materialize, coupled with a sense of entitlement to my money. For a moment, I considered it. Would be easier than the alternative. I had the money. But then I thought about what my grandfather would say about enabling versus helping. "I can't give you money, Dad." His face fell. "Evelyn, we're about to be homeless. After everything I've done for you, all the sacrifices I made for this family." "I'm not saying I won't help," I interrupted. "I'm saying I won't give you money. There's a difference." He looked confused. "What difference?" "I won't enable the same patterns that got us here, but I will help you find resources, affordable housing options, employment counseling for Mark, maybe even financial planning services." "We don't need counseling or services. We need a place to live." "This is humiliating, Evelyn. You need both," I said firmly. "And if you're willing to accept the help I'm offering, help that might actually change things, then I'm here for you. But I won't just write a check that postpones the inevitable next crisis." He stood up, anger replacing desperation. "So this is your revenge? Making us jump through hoops when you're sitting on millions?" This is how you treat your own father. This isn't revenge, Dad. It's boundaries. Something I should have established long ago. Boundaries, he scoffed. Is that what your therapist calls abandoning your family when they need? I gave you everything. I took a deep breath. Yes, I am seeing a therapist because healthy people seek help when they need it. That's what I'm offering you. Real help, not a temporary band-aid. And you didn't give me everything? Dad, Grandpa Leo gave me this workshop, and you tried to take it from me. He gathered his purse, heading for the door. Keep your help and your judgments. We'll manage without you, like we always have. You'll regret this, Evelyn. It's the irony of his statement. When he'd shown up specifically because they couldn't manage without me, wasn't lost on either of us. As he reached for the doorknob, I said quietly, "The offer stands. Dad, when you're ready for real change, call me." He paused, his back to me, shoulders rigid. For a moment, I thought he might turn around, might recognize the opportunity. Being presented, instead, he opened the door and left without another word. I sat alone in my new apartment. The dinner I'd been preparing now cold on the stove. The encounter had been painful, but clarifying. For the first time, I'd offered help with conditions designed to create actual change rather than perpetuate dependency. It wasn't what he wanted, but perhaps it was what he needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe checking in. "You okay?" I thought about the question carefully before responding. It's getting there, one day at a time. Surprisingly, it was true. 6 months passed quickly. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. My temporary apartment gave way to a cozy townhouse in a quieter neighborhood, with a small but private garden where I planted various herbs and small fruit bushes. Reminiscent of Grandpa Leo's garden. My career continued to flourish. The success of my Portland exhibition led to new commissions and expanded international responsibilities. The most significant changes, however, were internal. Weekly therapy sessions helped me recognize patterns I normalized throughout my life and develop healthier responses to conflict. I learned that establishing boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary. That helping others didn't have to mean sacrificing myself. After our confrontation in my apartment, my father and I didn't speak for nearly 3 months. I heard through Emily that he and Mark had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Mark had taken a job at a local grocery store, not his dream position, but steady employment for the first time in years. When my father finally called, his tone was different. Less entitled, more hesitant. "Evelyn, it's me. I was wondering if we could meet somewhere, just to talk." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop midway between our homes. I arrived early, choosing a table by the window where I could see him approach. He looked older, more subdued, but there was a quiet dignity in his bearing that I hadn't seen before. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as he sat down, hands wrapped around his cup for warmth. "About what?" I asked, cautious but open. "About everything, the workshop, the fundraiser. The way I've treated you." He took a deep breath. "I wasn't fair to you, Evelyn. Not just with the fundraiser, but for years. I favored Mark. I took you for granted. I resented your success instead of celebrating it. I pushed you towards what I thought was best, not what you truly loved." His admission stunned me. Never in my life had I heard my father acknowledge any wrongdoing, let alone a pattern of behavior. "What brought this on?" I asked. "Reality," he said with a sad smile. "When you have nothing left to control, you start to see things clearly. And I had a good teacher in that department." "What do you mean? Your grandfather?" "After you sold the workshop, I was so angry I went to visit his grave too. I don't know, complained to him about you." He shook his head at the memory. "While I was there, I remembered something he always said to me when I was young. Robert, life doesn't owe you anything. It's what you build with your own 2 hands that matters. And you need to let others build their own way too. He always said that about you, Evelyn, even when you were little. He saw something in your art, something I was too blind to recognize. because I was so focused on what I wanted for you." He looked up at me, eyes glistening. I realized I stopped building long ago. I just expected things to be given to me, by my career, by my family, by you. That's not the example I should have set for my children. I'm truly sorry, Evelyn. The conversation wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, old patterns threatening to resurface. But there was also honesty that had been missing from our relationship for decades. "I can't change the past," he said as we prepared to leave. "But I'd like to try for a better future, if you're willing." I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. "I'm open to trying, Dad, one step at a time." Rebuilding trust is a slow process. We started with monthly dinners, just the two of us at first. Eventually, including Mark when he demonstrated his own willingness to change. Our first holiday meal together was at a restaurant neutral territory that didn't carry the weight of past conflicts. My relationship with my brother evolved more slowly. His resentment ran deeper, his entitlement more ingrained. But necessity had forced changes neither of us could have predicted. The grocery store job led to an interest in culinary arts. By the following spring, he had earned his culinary certificate and started a small catering business specializing in gourmet pet treats. Surprisingly, "I like creating things," he told me during a rare moment of vulnerability. "There's something satisfying about taking raw ingredients and making something delicious." I didn't point out the metaphor. He'd find it in his own time. Not all family relationships could be salvaged. Some relatives chose to maintain their narrative of me as the selfish villain who destroyed the family legacy. I learned to make peace with their perception, understanding that I couldn't control how others viewed my choices. Instead, I focused on building my chosen family, friends who respected my boundaries, colleagues who valued my contributions, neighbors who became confidants. Chloe remained my steadfast supporter. And I expanded my circle to include people who brought positivity into my life. 6 months turned into a year. I received an unexpected email from Catherine Holloway with photos of the completed workshop restoration. She preserved the historical character while modernizing the infrastructure. Grandpa Leo's workbench held a place of honor in the main studio, fully restored. The garden had been replanted according to historical designs, including a new pattern of flowering plants that formed a subtle spiral symbolizing growth when viewed from above. "Your grandfather's legacy lives on," she wrote, different but honored. Her words captured perfectly what I'd been trying to articulate about my own journey. My connection to my grandfather wasn't contained in wood and plaster, but in the values he'd instilled in me: integrity, self-respect, the courage to build something lasting. The workshop had been a symbol important, but ultimately just a vessel. The true inheritance was the strength to make difficult choices, to value myself enough to establish boundaries, to recognize when letting go was the bravest option. On the anniversary of selling the workshop, I'd invited my father and brother to dinner at my townhouse, the first time they'd visited my new home. The conversation was sometimes awkward, old habits occasionally surfacing. But there was also laughter, genuine interest in each other's lives, and a tentative foundation for something healthier than what we'd had before. As they prepared to leave, my father paused in the doorway. "You know, Evelyn, I think your grandfather would be proud of you for selling his workshop." "Oh," I asked, surprised. For having the courage to make hard choices, Leo never took the easy path. Either he always told me you had a stubborn streak just like him, and that it would serve you well someday. I finally understand what he meant. His words were the final piece of validation I hadn't realized I was still seeking. Later that evening, sat in my small garden, surrounded by the scent of fresh earth and the evening breeze. Reflecting on the journey of the past year, I'd lost a workshop but gained clarity. I'd enforced boundaries but created space for genuine connection. I'd honored my grandfather's legacy not by clinging to a physical structure, but by embodying the principles he lived by. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but neither was it burdened by the weight of toxic patterns and unmet expectations. Each day brought new opportunities to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Some days were harder than others, but even the difficult moments felt honest in a way my previous life hadn't. I often think about that moment of decision, standing in my damaged workshop surrounded by the aftermath of disrespect, choosing to let go rather than continue the cycle. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one for me. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is release what no longer serves us, even when that something is wrapped in the comfortable cloak of family tradition. If you're watching this and struggling with similar decisions, remember that boundaries aren't walls designed to keep others out, their guidelines that teach others how to respectfully remain in your life. Your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to tolerate, but by how much you're willing to respect yourself. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision for your own well-being that others didn't understand? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear, right? Now, and if this resonated with you, please subscribe and hit the like button so others can find this message too. Remember, family is important, but so are you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to write your own, whatever that looks like for you.